further ado, Yucca, I'll turn over to you. Research Director at Exile Hub and co-author of this wonderful report. So please give us a round of applause.
I also want to give small thanks to our team as well from Exile Hub, who, we have some of our teammates from Mesa who are here today. We have our whole team from Chiang Mai who've come to show support, and also they've been doing a lot of the work behind the scenes in terms of organizing, putting out different press, whatever, releases, statements, etc. So thanks to the team for all of the coordination, support, and yeah, let's get into it. So this is the report name, and I want to go into just a little brief background about Exile Hub. We were founded in 2021 after the coup to provide support for different human rights defenders, journalists, and activists from Myanmar who were pushed into exile. We have a holistic support model which prioritizes providing safe housing, digital and legal protection, and mental health support for human rights defenders. We also conduct research on issues affecting Myanmar communities, and we do advocacy on a regional and international stage on these issues. So this report is also part of that sort of research and advocacy effort. And then we started this research primarily to fill what was an evidence gap on overlooked support dynamics in Northeast India. So actually in our Exile Hub community, we had our fellows, critical voices, people within our network who were based on the India side of the border, who we didn't understand what problems they were having. And we couldn't, we had all kinds of programming which was very useful and helpful for activists who were in Thailand. But then when we had to deal with some of the fellows and activists that were on the India side, most of our programming didn't match the needs of the people whom we were working directly with. And so we wanted to get a deeper understanding about what the dynamics were, what's happening, so that we can also deliver better support and better work. And I think a year and a half later, this report was born. And hopefully this can also help inform some of what the work that other people are doing as well. Click. Okay, so this picture here is taken from the Myanmar side of the border, of the India-Myanmar border. So this is at Rikoda crossing. Actually, a lot of different borders in Myanmar look like this. If you've also been to the Thai-Myanmar border, it also kind of looks like this with a little bridge and a little flag, and Myanmar on one side, Thailand on the other. The difference, however, that this border was open for a very long time. People were able to go back and forth without really any control across the border for people's movements. So there were a number of key motivations which prompted us to engage in this research. After the 2021 coup, around 83,000 people fled into India from Myanmar. But support for these displaced communities mostly flowed to the Thai-Myanmar border, and there was very little international attention or coordination to support communities on the India side. The people that were displaced included a large number of Exile Hub fellows, but we didn't understand the regional dynamics, and so we couldn't provide the support that was needed. There was also a need to understand India's legal and political environment and the complex terrain of ethnic politics in order to see which interventions were even possible on that side of the border. And when we started this research, we couldn't find many papers that centered the India border. We decided that this could be a good contribution to the overall body of knowledge in the post-coup landscape. And yeah, so this is a very open border. People could cross to trade, to transact, to move freely. And some border communities even commute daily across the border for work or school as needs arise. So just to go briefly into the methodology of the research, we started the research project in February 23 and concluded writing in July 25. So since we've stopped writing, there's also been a lot of changes and different kind of developments on that side of the border. Things move quickly. It's also why things took very long to complete with this research as well. As we were writing, new things kept happening, and you'll see some of that as I go through this presentation. During this time, we saw the formation and dissolution of a number of different political bodies, significant changes in the political landscape in Chin State, and this research was conducted in a number of locations in India, in Mizoram, Delhi, and some areas of Chin State as well. We had 19 interviews with frontline actors, 2 focus group discussions, and then our team conducted 2 separate field trips to gather information, as well as a desk review of existing research. Most of the interviews in the research paper were anonymized wherever needed, and only groups or individuals that explicitly consented were named in the research. So if you read the full report, you'll see that a lot of the information is anonymized. Okay. So there's some key limitations to the research. Due to the ongoing contestation of territory of different resistance groups in Chin State, some of the findings that were true in July may have shifted since then. We reached out to also a number of Mizo and Indian stakeholders throughout the research, but there was a low level of engagement. Most of the people who agreed to interviews and to go on record came from displaced Myanmar and Chin communities. Part of that may also be because Exile Hub is quite an underground organization, frankly. We didn't have much of a presence before then, and we certainly didn't have much of a presence on the India side, so it may be that people just didn't see why they would want to engage. Whereas Chin communities and other Myanmar activist groups already knew about our work, so they were eager to speak with us and engage. Since the findings focused on Mizoram, they can't be uniformly applied to other Indian states that are hosting Myanmar refugees, such as Manipur and Nagaland, but some parallels, I think, can still be drawn in the federal and state level organization of responses to displacement in India. So just to give some context, India and Myanmar share a very long colonial history. Both were part of the British Raj until each country's respective struggles for independence from colonial rule. And as such, the hard borders that are drawn between Myanmar and India are post-colonial artifacts, which border communities have had to learn to live with since independence. Chin and Mizo peoples have shared roots and culture over centuries, and this spans across these borders. This is true of indigenous communities on the other bordering states of Manipur and Nagaland as well. And until the formation of the centralized nation state, people moved quite freely and without hindrance across these territories. Historically, there's been a clear acknowledgement and understanding of the porousness of these artificial borders through the implementation of the free movement regime, which allowed border populations to move up to 16 kilometers on either side, freely without any paperwork, any documentation, no passports, IDs. But the FMR was terminated in 2024 with the Indian central government citing security concerns after some conflagration of conflict on the Myanmar border. But these kinships and relationships don't just end because border politics change. Kinship became the basis of support that Mizo communities extended to Chin populations who were displaced across the border after the 2021 coup. India is not a signatory to the 1951 Refugee Convention, and thus they don't have a framework for dealing with displaced populations. But the local Mizoram state government established a high-level committee on Myanmar refugees to address these issues of displacement on a very hyper-local level. That is to say, these kinship networks allowed for extension of aid and development of support mechanisms despite the federal government's lack of frameworks. And in this context, these relationships are proving to be incredibly important for aid delivery and mechanisms of support. And then this next slide is kind of giving a little bit of a background on some of the political dynamics in the Chin space. Some of these has also shifted a little bit since we finished this paper. And these political contexts between different Chin groups add a layer of complication as well. So the CNF, I'm going to use the clicker for this. Oh dear. Sorry. So I'll use the clicker so you guys can see. So the CNF, or CNA, was formed in 1988 in opposition to the then military junta. After the coup in 2021, they, alongside other defense groups, CDM networks, and elected parliamentarians from the 2020 election, formed this thing, which is the Interim Chin National Consultative Council, or the ICNCC. Unfortunately, there were some ideological divides, which led to the CNF withdrawing from the ICNCC in 2023. Oops. Hi. And then they formed something called the Chinland Council. They formed the Chinland Council alongside 20 other armed groups. So there it is. And then the Chin Brotherhood was also formed in 2023 as a military and political alliance between several ethnic armed organizations and some key players in the ICNCC as well. The Arakan Army then developed a relationship with the Chin Brotherhood a little bit after their formation in southern Chin. So they developed a relationship. Each group supported each other's joint military operations since 2024. And the CNF consider the presence of the AA in southern Chin, specifically in Paletwa, as a threat to regional sovereignty. The Chin Brotherhood and CNF have subsequently had a number of different clashes, which have led to the displacement of thousands of people from their homes in Chin State. In 2025, a reconciliation process was started, and it was facilitated by Mizoram's chief minister, and led to the formation of the Chin National Council, where all parties would agree to drafting a Chin National Charter. So we're yet to see what that will look like in the coming weeks, months, years. But even though these high-level consultations have begun, there's still clashes on the ground between Chin Brotherhood and CNF forces, even as recently as last month, when we saw 4,000 people, again, because of a conflict displaced into Mizoram. So only time will tell if the CNC can be a successful endeavor in uniting the different factions. We'll just have to wait to learn what's going on there. The relational layers within Chin society are very much intersectional and overlapping. So there's at least 53 identified tribal identities within Chin communities, and some aid networks have been delivered along those lines. So we have these relationships, like tribal and ethnic relationships. Most Chin people are Christians, but they also belong to a lot of different denominations, including Baptists, Presbyterians, and Catholics, which deliver aid and support to those within their church bodies and along church lines. So that's another layer of relationships. So some people may be from the same ethnic, but from different religions. Some people have the same religion, different ethnics. And then while other is delivered through competing political factions or armed groups, and some are delivered through township-based organizations. So depending on which township you're from, there are different groups that organize along those lines, and then other groups that organize along political and armed group lines. So all of these layers play an important role in people's relational identities and also how support is delivered in different communities. So this is something that we found that people sometimes have competing allegiances or have to choose between which layer of identity to prioritize in organizing and in delivering support. And these relational layers also play a role in the gaps that are formed in these support systems. Refugee services rely on churches and ethnic networks and volunteer-run shelters, which can lead to exclusion for those who fall through the cracks of this complicated relational system within society. There, unfortunately, are no formal protection mechanisms, and so refugee support that is being provided based on these kinship relationships are not based on shared or universal human rights, which can lead to a higher level of precarity, which affects both refugees and service providers. There's also issues with the US aid suspension. A lot of aid on the India border was coming from USAID, and when that was suspended, that led to serious shortages in support. And the FCRA, or Foreign Contribution Regulation Act restrictions, limit the reach of INGOs and overburden grassroots organizations that are already under-resourced and overstretched. So FCRA is it's a regulation in India which limits what foreign money can come into the country. So it's kind of like a foreign money entering limitation. And finally, mental health support for frontline workers is also nearly non-existent, and research shows that this can lead to burnout, chronic stress, and long-term trauma within communities as well. Okay, thanks. So essentially, the humanitarian response provided on the India-Myanmar border context is limited by a complicated web of security, resource, and legal limitations and restrictions on national, subnational, and local ethnic levels. And this limited response is delivered through a huge number of different entities, such as CSOs, faith-based organizations, diaspora, armed resistance groups, etc. And then the flow of aid is then mediated by different political, ethnic, religious, and geographical affiliations of each group, and then delivered to communities on the grounds. So you can see that there's a ton of limitations, both from external and also internal kind of dynamics, which leads to, let's say, like an unequal distribution of aid on the ground when it comes down to it. So this is a quote from someone from one of our field trips. The constraints on humanitarian response and the complicated flows of aid create significant gaps in what kind of delivery of support to displaced communities. Throughout our field research, we heard stories from different communities about the lack of support for basic needs. So church-based support remains the most consistent in these communities, and local communities in Mizoram provide some support as people initially crossed over as well. But the problem of relegating communities to refugee camps is that camps provide only for mere subsistence. And oftentimes camps are far from economic engines of the region, and those within these refugee camps lack access to gainful work. So there's a lack of integration of refugee communities that are separated, that are in separate camps with larger society, and few opportunities to return to their homes because of this ongoing conflict as well. Okay, so the next slide. Throughout this research, we identified some of the key gaps in service provision for displaced communities. We see gaps in the availability and distribution of medical supplies across displaced populations, both inside Myanmar and in Mizoram, and big challenges in getting supplies to needy areas due to on-ground constraints and on-ground conflicts as well. So like travel constraints, on-ground conflict. And even though there are some NUG-sanctioned schools in the region, the NUG can provide very little more than just stationery or books to these schools. And these schools are heavily under-resourced. Education is sorely lacking for thousands of youths. And as the war drags on, this education gap will only widen if it's not addressed quickly. Livelihood opportunities are also very few and far between. Unfortunately, Mizoram is one of India's least wealthy states, and lack of opportunities for livelihood extend from the local population to the refugee communities. So even local Mizo people have a difficult time finding work in Mizoram, and that means that when refugees flow in, there's also very little work for them to earn. Many people only have access to manual labor jobs, which earn less than 500 rupees per day, or around $8 per day. Again, this lack of mental health resources for frontline workers and refugees will reduce resiliency of communities and may have a lot of unforeseen consequences down the line. So with the livelihood opportunities, the difference with the Thai side of the border is that here, at least people can work, and there is a lot of work to be had. Thailand recently also changed some rules around like refugees being able to work here. But on the India side, that doesn't exist because there are already so few economic opportunities in India's northeast. So the executive summary and the full paper contains the full list of recommendations for different actors that have been developed through the research. The recommendations come after multiple rounds of consultations with different regional actors and local organizations, support organizations that are working with communities on the ground. This is just a kind of a short summary of some key recommendations. I encourage you guys to read the summary and also the full paper if you guys want to get a more in-depth look. But for donors, generally, donors and INGOs have an obligation to uphold humanitarian principles and maintain their commitment to populations in acute need, particularly during critical periods when lives are at stake. We should look at prioritizing India-based interventions, not just focusing solely on Thailand, and to fund grassroots groups directly if possible, provide flexible and unrestricted support wherever possible. To civil society, humanitarian assistance has to remain strictly apolitical and human-centered in its approach. The practice of categorizing or labeling vulnerable populations based on political affiliations, it's a bias that undermines the fundamental humanitarian principles of impartiality. And all individuals in need should be getting support regardless of their political associations or internal dynamics of their communities. And then while certain local disputes should ideally be resolved through internal mechanisms without internationalization, local stakeholders should also acknowledge their responsibility for addressing broader humanitarian consequences of their actions. And finally, authorities should be acknowledging the legal status and safety needs of refugees and frontline workers in India. Political fragmentation among local stakeholders, it's a common problem in most liberation movements worldwide. the pursuit of a unified platform will encounter different kinds of challenges that can create divisions within coalitions. But so the Chin people's struggle for self-determination also exemplifies this dynamic. Internal disagreements can temporarily create political fragmentation, and this should be understood as part of a natural evolution of political movements rather than a fundamental weakness of the cause or the movement that's happening on that side of the border. So yeah, these are our key kind of recommendations that I have for the paper. I encourage you guys to read the full paper as well if you want to get a better understanding. And I guess we can take a quick Q&A to see whether you guys have any questions or any kind of clarifications.